Welcome to School of PE podcast. I'm your host, Chris Miller, and I'm so glad that you could join me this week. We are going to discuss topics about FE, PE, and SC, and we're also going to answer questions that will help students prepare for their exams. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the SOPE's weekly podcast. Again, I'm Chris Miller, and today I got Luke PE joining us today. So if we could just give him a warm welcome. And then Luke, thanks for joining me this morning. And if you want to kind of tell the audience a little bit about yourself, we'll go ahead and dive in after that.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. So basically, I am a field engineer. I work for an environmental remediation company called Cape Environmental. I've been traveling on the road as an engineer for probably about 6 years. I've been a field engineer a little longer than that, but just decided to take it to the road. So I've been away from home, and currently I'm on a project called Pearl Harbor Sediments Cleanup in Hawaii, and I'm actually where the project has been put on hold for a month, so don't have a lot going on.
Well, hey, thanks for the introduction. And again, thanks for joining us. I can honestly say I've talked to a lot of engineers, but I've never talked to one that's took their act to the road. So it's kind of exciting to have a traveling engineer. When I usually think of traveling, I'm thinking of rock stars or something like that. So, what is a field engineer and what do you do?
Field engineer, in my terms, is someone that has a background in engineering. Obviously, it could be civil, environmental, mechanical, even construction engineering. In the company that I work for, so field engineer could really be more broad than that. But for what I do, that's what qualifies you as a field engineer. But basically, we provide field support to project managers, could be an environmental manager, could be an office engineer, project engineer that works on the project just, from his home or in an office. And so a field engineer like me, I'm 100% in the field. I'm at a project site, and I currently actually have a role as a site QC manager. So I'm a field engineer by title, but a site QC manager on site.
All right, very cool. Thanks for that background. So before we get too far, you said you're away from home. So where is home typically for you?
Home for me, where I grew up, was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I worked there for a couple years before I moved out to Philadelphia for my first field engineering job.
So are you a Steelers fan then, Luke?
I am a Steelers fan. I'd say we're pretty lucky right now.
Yeah. I was going to say you guys are pretty excited. I don't know how they got in, but they got in. So that's great. Not a bad way to send Big Ben off into the sunset. So very nice. So, so field engineers, what are some of the, I guess, skill sets that, are important for a field engineer?
Skill sets, aside from the technical abilities that someone might have from their school and everything, one of the biggest things I think that a field engineer needs to have is the ability to work independently. Mm-hmm. I am my own boss on site, even though I do have a supervisor back at my company's home office. But you definitely have to be able to work independently, but you also have to be able to deal with several different personalities, and this is going to change from project to project, even more so than someone that works in an office setting. So you need to work well under pressure, mm-hmm. Quickly, but you have to have good communication with clients as well.
That makes sense. So I mean, you said you're on the road, so you're always pretty much on the road, never really at one home base, I guess.
That's correct. It's definitely project dependent. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I will have the opportunity to go home. It could be, every couple months. It could be, twice a year. But you're really always out of your comfort zone.
That makes sense. So, we've been dealing with this, COVID pandemic for a couple of years now. It's affected everybody, right? A lot of people used to go into the office every day, they went remote. So, how has it affected what you do on a daily basis?
Well, it's been tough. It affects the project. Not always in a good way. It's been difficult. Travel's been especially difficult for me being in Hawaii.
Hmm.
Um, Initially, when COVID hit, there wasn't an option to go home. Hawaii is extra strict
Hmm.
as far as COVID vaccination and testing goes, and it remains that way to this day. So, fortunately, I have been able to come home
Oh, very nice.
for the holidays.
So, you say the project that you're working on is Project Pearl Harbor. So, before we kind of go into a little bit more detail exactly what that project entails, you say it's on pause. Is that COVID related or?
No, it's not COVID related at all. Um, Typically, the projects will shut down for a week or two for the holidays, and um, the schedule just the schedule just didn't work out for us to work right up until the holidays, and the following weeks here there wasn't a specific phase of the project that could be fit into the first few weeks of January either. So.
So, how do you I guess, spend your time on such a lengthy pause?
Basically, I try to get in everything that I normally miss back at home. I I have the option to do work from home, if I choose.
Hmm.
But being away as long as I am, I really try to get in other things, such as visiting family, even with COVID going on. There are other priorities when I'm at home.
I can imagine. So, can you go into more detail what your project? I mean, more in detail with the project you're currently working on, or?
Sure. So we are doing a sediment remediation project for the Navy. Um, our company typically does government contract work. So we're currently working for the Navy. We're out on the water in Pearl Harbor pretty much every day. There are times when we're not on the water, but we are actually working on remediating the sediments
Mhm.
that are contaminated with PCBs and heavy metals from. We all know there's some heavy military activity in that area, so historically, so that's what we're working on.
That's pretty cool. So, usually whenever I have a guest on, I always ask them, hey, what drew you to engineering? But my question for you is going to be it's going to be two-parter, really. So, first is, when did you realize or did you take a direct path into engineering? Like, hey, right out of high school, you knew, hey, I'm going to go get my engineering degree. I'm going to be an engineer. Or did you take a scenic route? Kind of explain, your path to engineering.
Well, I'd say my path to engineering is started, and it honestly started with my mother. Getting into college and everything, I wasn't probably as motivated as I should have been, but I knew I wanted to work outside, and I knew I was good at math. So I went into engineering, and it ended up being a great path for me. I didn't actually envision myself traveling this much. I never thought it was even an option, but it is, and most people don't realize that. But it turned out for the better for me. That's for sure.
Well, great. It's funny that you mentioned that that a lot of people don't think of traveling as an option for an engineer, at least not in the maybe the duration or the frequency that you do it. Usually, you work out of an office and maybe you go to a job site, right? But for you, it's every day you're on the road basically. So, what drew you to that aspect of it, of as opposed to being in a central location?
Oh, well, money is one reason. You get paid better on the road, hands down. You get better experience, I believe, as well. Being in the field is probably the best experience you can get. Um, you're getting, especially traveling to different projects, all different types of hands-on
Mhm.
experiences. And if you ever want to turn that down, it should be a lot easier to go back to an office once you're in the field.
No, that makes sense. So, how long do you think you're going to keep traveling on the road before you decide that you maybe want to settle down in an office?
Um, so I actually am probably near the end of my field engineering career. I've with my company decided to move on, in the next year or so to more project management type roles where I actually will get to go to the field. I'll just work remotely probably 80% of the time. So it's kind of a good, I think it would be a good transition.
No, I agree. It's funny. Like a lot of people think that project managers and engineers are two totally different people, two different types of roles, but they kind of go hand in hand. So, would you say that
Mhm.
the job that you do now has maybe prepared you to be able to kind of slide into a project manager role?
Oh yeah, for sure. Being a site quality control manager and being under, you have your own agenda as a site quality control manager, and it's in short, it's basically managing risk.
Hmm.
In short, you need to make sure your project is going according to the specifications and guidelines that have been set in the Navy's contract. And anything that goes wrong there, or any step that you might miss, could end up hurting your company down the road, or even the client. So
Hmm.
it's a big role, and it's a good step into project management.
Well, that makes sense. So, I meant to ask this earlier and I just kind of slipped it. So, you were talking about a little bit more in detail about the project that you're working on now, and then you mentioned PCBs. What are they?
PCBs, they're a big topic of discussion when it comes to EPA Superfund sites, and they decide which sites get remedial actions. Basically, PCBs are polychlorinated biphenyls. They're man-made chemicals in the hydrocarbon family, but they're extremely toxic to the environment and humans, and that there is enough reason for cleanup.
That makes sense. So another question is, so what would constitute a time critical removal action versus a non-time critical removal?
Um, time critical actions are more along the lines of like an emergency response type cleanup. I believe that it is a six. So whenever the EPA decides that action needs to happen, if it needs to happen more so immediately, like within, I really think it's a 6 month window. You start operations, start cleaning up. That's considered time critical. If it's outside that window and it's not actively, I want to say, harming the environment or humans in a big negative way, then it would probably be more of a non time critical removal action.
That makes sense. I appreciate the explanation there. So, you mentioned emergency response. So, have you had to go through any emergency response training? If so, what kind?
Um, I haven't actually taken part in an emergency response cleanup. As far as training, we are familiar with it. We do a 40-hour HAZWOPER training, which familiarizes you with hazardous waste cleanup, storage, disposal, all of it. So if it actually happened, and I believe we do have contracts where we could get called for emergency action, then I would be ready.
Oh, that's good. Being ready is always important, right? So,
That's for
um,
sure.
what's your favorite thing about being an engineer?
Oh, engineering, um, and this is especially important for young people coming out of school, and just trying to make it through school. I didn't know if I was on the right path, but engineering is so broad. You could do so many things. You don't necessarily even have to be an engineer with an engineering degree. You could do sales. You could go into project management isn't engineering. That's totally separate from engineering. Engineers can lead into project managers, but it is really broad. I couldn't even tell you the different paths that you could probably take.
No, I agree. And I always tell people one of the great things that I like about engineering is that every day can be different, and there's so many different things you can do. I mean, you have everything from civil engineers to chemical engineers. So, the I guess the avenues at which you can go down are almost limitless, and that's one of the great things about engineering. Um, you were talking about school and the difficulties that some people may have. So, can you talk about your experience with taking both the FE and the PE exams?
So I did take the FE exam, and I believe that was within a year or so of completing school, which I would recommend taking it earlier than later, because
Right.
you just need to be you want that information fresh in your mind. I do think the FE is more of a mathematician's type of exam. If you know where to find the information and you're good at math, you can pass the FE. As far as the PE goes, that's when it becomes more discipline specific, and you really need to have a good understanding. You just can't study and get by. You need to actually understand the material, but it's also exciting because it definitely helps you be a better engineer. At least in the field, it does.
That makes sense. So, let's say you're invited back to your high school for a career day, and a senior walks up to you and says, "Hey, Luke, I'm contemplating going to be an engineer. I'm getting ready to start college." And they say, "Hey, what kind of advice or tips can you give me? What would you share with that student?"
Well, ultimately, I think it comes down to relationships. How can these high school students relate to you? That's what's going to get them. If you really recommend being an engineer, then you need to be able to relate to them in some way. And if they have some background in the outdoors, if they're good at math, if they like being on a construction site. That's a big thing about being a field engineer. The construction environment it's a little rougher, it's a little different. It's not an office environment. That's the type of atmosphere that high school students would be able to look forward to if they're into that.
That sounds good. So, you bring up something interesting. So, can you kind of walk me through what an experience would be like on a construction site? You say it's a little rougher than an office, which makes sense, but can you kind of describe what a experience would be on one of those sites?
Um, yeah, it definitely is different from an office environment, I'd say. I mean, you have to picture the type of people you're working with. You're typically working with people that don't have degrees, that may have been brought up a little different. They've worked as a laborer. They've worked as maybe an operator of a big piece of equipment. And these are the types of people they are. I don't want to say they're rougher, because I feel like I'm rougher than most people, but it's that atmosphere. It's more of a down to earth atmosphere. Everyone. I'm not saying these people are mean. They're extremely nice. It's it's a more homey. It makes me feel comfortable. It's what you're comfortable with, and it can be especially rewarding working in that type of environment.
All right, I appreciate you for sharing that. So, as we mentioned, there's so many different ways you can go about engineering, right? So many different paths you can go. Technology plays a pretty big part of engineering. And, as we all know, technology changes quickly. There's trends in technology that changes. So, how do you keep up with the latest and greatest in engineering, to making sure you're up to date with everything? What do you do?
Actually, so I guess one of these reasons would be another good reason to travel is you develop a big network, a large network of people that you can connect with. I regularly talk to other professional engineers. They may or may not be in the same discipline as me, but everyone can kind of benefit from one another in one way or another like that. I everyone uses the internet, but LinkedIn is a big professional resource. And I'm also a part of the Society of Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration. And honestly, I wish I could go to more national conferences. And I know COVID has a big part in that right now, but I would definitely recommend going to conferences to network with people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, COVID kind of took a lot of the conferences out of the mix for a while. In engineering, there's so many great ones. I've been to a few myself, and they're a lot of fun. You meet a lot of great people, and networking is important. So, yeah, those are some good thoughts. As I was reading the questions for today, something popped out. I was like, this is intriguing. I got to ask you. So, I see that you've written some research articles. So, do you care to kind of talk about any of those that you've written, and maybe what has motivated you to do it?
Sure. It's been a few years, but these were mostly done, when I was either completing my bachelor's or master's degrees in engineering. But um, one of the first ones I wrote that pops to mind is when I spent a summer at the University of Oklahoma, and there I had an advisor who was a professor. He was really good at what he did, what he does. He still does it, but he does environmental cleanup. Um, Actually, he designs passive treatment systems for the most part. Cleans up acid mine drainage type contamination, and I got to spend a summer down there. It was really hot in Oklahoma. Being from Pennsylvania, I mean, it's a different atmosphere,
Oh,
but it
for
was
sure.
a super rewarding experience. We took sediment cores. We actually analyzed them in the lab, and we wrote a paper. And I was a big part of that, and I presented at a national conference the following summer, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I also did a master's thesis for a mining engineering professor in Pittsburgh, and we did a lot of conference presentations there as well. But we traveled, and maybe that was enough initiative for me to start traveling. Was seeing these, going to these conferences, seeing different people. There's a lot out there. There really is.
No, I completely agree. And would have never thought that, entering in engineering, you'd be able to travel as much as you do. That's pretty cool. But also, with travel comes some pluses and some minuses, right? Pluses is you meet a lot of different people, you get to see a lot of the country, maybe even, parts of the globe. But sometimes maybe some of your favorite hobbies or pastimes are not road friendly. So, you got to find ways to kind of eat up some of that time. So, what are some of your favorite hobbies or pastimes?
Coming from Western Pennsylvania, I mean, I'm big into the outdoors. I love backpacking. I've been on the Appalachian Trail a few times, and camping, fishing. It's all outdoorsy type things for me. But traveling has actually, opened some doors, but it's closed some doors, but it's actually opened a lot more. So, I've had the opportunity to see different national parks, see all sorts of things. Hawaii being one. I've got into actually scuba diving and free diving out there in the water. It's nothing I something I never thought that I would end up doing, but it's there, and why not take advantage of it?
I agree. No, 100% agree with you. So I'm sure you've traveled quite a few places. If you had to pick your favorite, where was it?
Oh wow. Honestly, I think San Diego, California was one of my favorite locations. I was only there for 3 months, but it's a nice area. You have decent weather, you have the ocean next to you, and you also have mountains not too far
Mhm.
away that you could actually make it to on the weekends. So it's a nice location.
No, I agree. California is one of the few places where if you want to go skiing in the morning, you can still hit the beach in the afternoon. It'll be only a couple hour drive. Now, San Diego's a great place. So I got to ask you, since you've been to California, you spent some time there. Have you gone to In-N-Out Burger?
I have
And
In and
what
Out
and
Burger.
what is your feedback on that? I'm a California guy myself, so I might be biased asking the question. But what is your thumbs up, thumbs down? What do you give it?
Um, I have to tell you, Chris, I'd give it a thumbs up for sure, but
All
the
right.
the line. to go through the drive-through, I'll give a thumbs down.
Oh, I agree. I mean, it's crazy. No matter what time of day you go, the lines are just ridiculous. It's funny. I was out in LA just about 2 months ago, and I was like, I went to In-N-Out. Got to go to In-N-Out, right? So I get to the parking lot. I'm like, holy cow, there's like 40 cars in line. I said, I'm just going to walk in. I said, what are all these crazy people doing waiting in line? I couldn't even get in the building. I was like, maybe that's why the line's so long. But no, I'm with you. Thumbs up for the food and thumbs down for the line. So, but Luke, as we get close to the end of the time here, any last, I hate to say last words, but any words of wisdom you want to share with the engineering world?
Honestly, I'm gonna give the advice that I probably would have given myself. Whenever I went to college, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to go to college. I truly believe that everyone has the ability to succeed in college. Whether or not you think you can, I mean, that's up to you. But I went through my first 2 years of college. It was rough. But after 2 years, that's when I went to Oklahoma and I decided that I want to go to grad school after this. And I really need to, start trying a little harder. So I liked what I did. And as long as you have some perseverance and you can stick with it, you have to look at the end goal. What's your goal? If you can have a clear goal in mind and motivation to get there, you'll get there. It's going to be a roller coaster. Just stick with it.
I like it. Those are some very wise words to live by. And you're absolutely right. I mean, not only it just applies to maybe college, but also, for those that are preparing for their FE, their PE. I mean, it seems like such a monumental, obstacle, but, you got the motivation. You see what the goal is at the end. You just got to keep your head down and keep on trucking. So, Luke, I've had a lot of fun with you. I'd love to have you back. I'd love to hear about what else you're doing out there in the great state of Hawaii. But in the meantime, thanks for coming out. Stay safe out there. And again, I'll hope to see you soon on a upcoming podcast. To the rest of you out there, thanks for joining and enjoy the rest of the week. Luke, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Have a good week.
You as well.
Thanks for having me.